My name is Tara Cosgrove, and this is my investigation for Material World. I chose to do early stage 1 with the testable question of which materials sink or float in water. The title of this experiment is Will it sink or float? This is my selected investigation for the major summative part of the assessment task. The aim of this experiment is to test which items sink or float in water. The sinking or floating of items is relative to what material the item is made from, as well as its size and weight. Students will determine the likely outcome of the individual items being tested and create an overarching hypothesis to explain which items will sink or float. The hypothesis of this experiment is items that are made from light materials will float, therefore, items that are made from heavy materials will sink. The assumption that something will float or sink depending on weight is relative to the size of the object as well as the material it is made from. The underlying concept being learnt here is density. For the purpose of this experiment, the hypothesis simply states light and heavy materials as terms such as density are too advanced for early stage 1. The equipment used for this investigation was a large clear 6-litre container and 6 litres of water to fill it, as well as items that sink or float. The sinking items used for this investigation stood to represent a broad range of materials, sizes, and weights. The sinkable items were a metal spoon, a key, a stone, a 50-cent coin, a golf ball, and a marble. The floating items also tried to represent a broad range of materials, sizes, and weights, and included a cork, a stick, specifically that of a eucalyptus tree, because not all woods float, a guitar plectrum or pick, a tennis ball, a leaf, and a piece of bark. This experiment sought to engage fair testing to ensure valid results. Using the mnemonic cows moo softly, meaning change, measure, and say the same for the independent, dependent, and controlled variables. The independent variable was the objects being tested. The dependent variable was if the objects sink or float, and the control variables were the container full of water in which the items were placed into. The method for this experiment would first begin by having the table ready, as I'll show in a few slides, which will include the format of the items, the student predictions, and the outcome. First, ask the student which items they think will sink or float and record this in the prediction column. Step 2, gently place an item into the body of water and record in the table what the outcome of the object is, whether it sinks or floats. Step 3, remove the item from the water once the result has been recorded. Only have one item in the water at any one time. Once the item has been placed and the outcome of sink or float is recorded, remove the item. Step 4, repeat steps 2 and 3 until the outcome of all items being tested has been recorded. Step 5, repeat the experiment again at least 3 times with all items to ensure accuracy and reliability of the experiment. Repetition can also help increase student understanding by seeing the sinking or floating objects again in action. Allowing students to place the items themselves and observe and manipulate the materials out of the water may also aid their understanding by able to feel the material, their weight, and their size. Depicted are the images showing the results. From the top row on the left to the bottom row on the right, we have the leaf floating, the sinking golf ball, sinking metal spoon, a sinking marble, a floating guitar plectrum or pick, a sinking stone, a floating stick, a sinking key, a sinking coin, a floating cork, floating tennis ball, and floating piece of bark. Here are the results. As previously mentioned, the results were recorded in a table and the data listed as if the items floated or sinked, along with student predictions and the name of the item. As the images depicted in the previous slide, these were the outcomes. These results were also the average of the experiment being repeated 3 times for reliability. Each time the experiment was conducted, the same items would float and sink. I created some student predictions based off the material size and weight of items in relation to the hypothesis that items that are made from light materials will float and items that are made from heavy materials will sink. To conclude the experiment, the hypothesis was correct in that items made from light materials floated and items made from heavy materials sank, and that this is dependent on the material in relation to the size of the object. For example, the cork and the key used are roughly the same size. However, the cork is made from a light material, so it floats, and the key is made from metal, which is a heavy material and therefore sinks. For the discussion of this experiment, I noted that these results show that the hypothesis is based on the assumption that something will float or sink depending on its weight, but that this is relative to the size of the object and the material it is made from, and that the underlying concept that is being taught here is density. I also noted that allowing students to hold and manipulate the items and place them in the water themselves will help aid their understanding by feeling the weight and material. I also noted that repetition of this study could be done with other items not used in this experiment. An idea I came up with was food items, which could be good, such as fruits, vegetables, breads, or biscuits, depending on student allergies. The limitation of this experiment were also that I conducted the experiment on a rainy day, and so my natural materials of the leaf, stick, and pieces of bark were slightly damp. And so by the third repetition of the experiment, the stick and bark were beginning to show signs of sinking from taking in so much water. Additionally, I noted that the tennis ball may be a confusing item for early stage 1 students, as although it floats, in comparison to other floating objects, a lot of the ball is underwater as the fluffy material covering the ball absorbs a lot of water, especially by the third repetition. The idea for my experiment was from a Google search discussing the sink or float experiment, but it was for preschool age children from the website Happy Hooligans. I adapted this experiment to an early stage 1 investigation by recording the data in a table using objects other than toys, keeping the control variable of the water and container constant by not colouring the water or adding anything else, only placing objects in one at a time and not creating mess or disturbance in the water. All images used in this PowerPoint were taken by me whilst doing the experiment. Thank you for listening.